Hello, I am Teresa Levitt. I'm a historian of science, and what I'd like to do today is talk a bit about what history can tell us about this question, what is science? So one of the first things you notice, looking at history, is that there's no one single procedure that all scientists have all followed throughout time. What you see, on the other hand, is you see this sort of set of practices emerging over time, which can be sort of grouped under this title of scientific method. So the first, and really the most basic of these, is simply observing the world around you. And this actually has been going on for thousands of years, including during this classical period of Greek antiquity, when philosophers first began trying to give a purely naturalistic explanation of the world around them. Now, your textbook is actually very hard on some of these figures. It quotes Plato as saying that you actually shouldn't pay any attention to the physical world around you. What you should really do is pay attention to the mind's eye inside your head. The trick is that Plato was actually not the most influential thinker of this period. That title belongs to Aristotle. And Aristotle actually did think that you should spend a lot of time observing the world around you. His reputation actually was someone who would go out and sort of really get his hands dirty, digging around in the mud, exploring things. You have the painting that's shown in your textbook, the famous painting called The School of Athens. For example, it shows Plato in these red robes, and Plato sort of gesturing towards the heavens, saying it's like we need to sort of think our lofty abstract thoughts. But then you also have beside him, you have Aristotle in his blue robes, who's sort of holding his hand down, sort of gesturing towards the ground and saying what we actually have to do is stay grounded and really observe the world that we are in fact living in. One of the most famous incidents that Aristotle is known for has to do with this particular shark called the dogfish shark. So Aristotle, he liked to go down to the docks, see what it is that fishermen were bringing in with their nets. And one of the things that he described in his book of animals was this particular shark that he claimed gave birth to live young. So for centuries, these books were sort of copied down and accepted. But after a while, people became suspicious of Aristotle and said, this is clearly ridiculous. We know that sharks lay eggs, just like all fish lay eggs. Until the late 19th century, when biologists figured out that, in fact, Aristotle had been right all along. So this particular fish gave birth to live young. So the point of all of this is that Aristotle actually did like to make careful observations of the world around him. And he became, largely based on this, one of the most important figures in this emerging naturalistic explanation of the world. The problem is that he actually became a bit too important. And so by the time you get to the Middle Ages, some millennia later, the standard practice was for them to rely more on the authority of Aristotle than on what they themselves could see about the world. And then this led to the problems that we've seen in Oxford College when they were refusing to count the number of teeth in the horse because they would rather just read what Aristotle had to say about it. So it's this practice that changes then in the scientific revolution. So at this point that you see several new features then added to simply observing the world. For example, skepticism, this idea that you should not accept something simply based on authority because somebody else said it was true. Rather, you should go try to test it itself. As well as things like reproducibility and experimentation and several of the other features that we talked about in class. So it's really with the scientific revolution that you begin to see emerging some of these practices that we now consider to be the scientific method. And we'll talk more about the scientific revolution when we get to section 2 next week. Bye-bye.